There is a big patch set to drop next week, and it is definitely going to include some spicy balance changes. Team Second Dinner has been on vacation for the last few weeks, which is why we haven't seen any OTAs. So I think it's all going to build up into this one big patch. So just as a quick PSA, there is not going to be an OTA this Thursday. Again, they're waiting for the big patch. So I thought I'd take a stab at what I think could be some really interesting balance changes in Marvel Snap right now. Now, I'm not a developer, so I don't have it perfect here, but they're just based on my personal experiences, what I would like to see them change. I got some buffs, I got some nerfs, so let's get to it. Kicking it off with Kitty Pryde. Okay, so Kitty Pryde, as you know, it is a 1/0, and when it returns to your hand, you get +2 power. It's always going to return at the start of each turn. Well, I like that ability. It is pretty well, in my opinion, single-handedly carried the bounce archetype. Like, bounce exists before Kitty Pryde, but it was not as strong as you know it today. And I want to keep that intact. All of the synergies that Kitty Pryde works with, I want to keep those intact. That bouncing, the Collector, Angela, Bishop, all these things, let's keep it the way it is. But let's just tweak the numbers here on the power levels. So I'm buffing her to a 1/2 on her base stat line, but I'm changing her ability to +1 power, which, yes, is a net nerf. But it is actually only a nerf if you play the card from turn 1 and you bounce it back to your hand repeatedly throughout the entire game, or turn 2 or turn 3 or turn 4. Because you will end up with a more higher power Kitty Pryde if you play her on those turns and continue to play her. Whereas with my proposed change, if you play her on turn 5, you're actually going to bounce her back to the hand on 6, play her again, she'll be a 1/3, which is 1 power more than her current addition in the game. But vice versa, right now, if you play Kitty Pryde on turn 1, you bounce her every single turn, and then on turn 6, you play her, you will have a 10 power Kitty Pryde. Whereas with my change, she would be at 7 power, which is still crazy good. We're talking about a 1-drop here. Now, of course, you have to spend energy to invest to get to that point. But what has been so broken about Kitty Pryde is not necessarily the energy for power that you're working with. It's two things, I think. One, you have a 1/10 on turn 6 that you can also spend 5 energy on other things. So like that is just a huge power swing. But also the synergies along the way. It doesn't feel bad playing that 1 energy card because she's going to bounce back. Like I said, buff the Collector, buff the Angela location. That's like one of the craziest combos. Your Bishop's retaining power from it. There's just so much working together to make this really nice deck that has basically been at the top of the meta for the last few weeks. And I do believe it needs a change. I think this is a pretty safe change to make. It's not going to kill Kitty Pryde. It's not going to kill the bounce archetype. It's just going to tweak the numbers ever so slightly so that it's just a little bit different to play. Okay, next up is High Evo. Now, whoa, hold on. I am not just strictly buffing High Evo here. I'm going to get to the evolved cards shortly. But one of the things about High Evo is it's so disappointing to actually play the card. You don't really want to. It's a 4/4 stat line. You have so many interesting evolved cards in your deck that you want to play. So this ended up being just a bit of a waste of a draw a lot of the time. You don't actually end up playing it. So if you have this cool variant like this one, well, you don't actually get to play it on the board and see it in game. So with the changes that I'm about to make, keep in mind that I'm buffing High Evo to a 4/7. This is actually the original data mine stat line that they had for the card. They must have changed it along the way in the data mines and kept the evolution cards as strong as they are. But I think we could go back to a 4/7 with the proposed changes that I'm about to make here. So just keep in mind, my proposition for High Evo is to be a 4/7. Now let's get to the evolved cards. Okay, so the first one is Hulk. I feel like this is pretty easy, man. Like, Hulk's just been a bit too nuts. It surprised me. I didn't think Hulk would be as strong when I first looked at High Evolutionary in the data mines. But when you have a 6/20 on turn 6, and then you also get to play a WASP that zaps at your opponent's stuff, like there's just a lot going for this combination of cards. It works nicely with the whole build, especially with Lockjaw. You cheat this out and it's still going to continue to grow in power for every turn. You have unspent energy. It's a bit nuts. So if we're going to buff High Evo to 7 power, right? That's +3 power. Well, let's change Hulk here to only giving +1 power on his ability. I feel like that is a pretty safe thing, man. Like, you have 3 turns of unspent energy, you go to a 6/15. That's a really good stat line. That's still going to win you a lot of games, right? Whereas before it would go to 6/18, which is just kind of bonkers, right? And then if we take that's the difference, I've at least distributed that to High Evo, which might actually feel better to play. You can actually play that before and then play Hulk on curve. And then maybe it's like you didn't even lose too much energy or power, I mean, right? So I don't know. I feel like this kind of is necessary because I don't know how else you change the card. You don't actually change Hulk because like Hulk doesn't need a change. It's his evolved form that needs a change. So it has to be somewhere in the text. But then like you can't change ongoing. You can't. I feel like this is the only safe change that you can make to this card if you're going to change it. And the same rules apply to the thing. So I think instead of, repeating twice more, so essentially he's giving out 3 -1 powers, right? Now it's just 2 -1 power, right? To 2 separate cards or the same card, whichever one he ends up randomly hitting. That means that he ends up being a 4/8, right? Before he's like value of a 4/9, now he's looking at a 4/8. And this also indirectly hurts Abomination, right? Because Abomination is getting those discounts from all the negative power cards on the field. So if Thing was to hit 3, which would be really lucky, it doesn't happen all the time, but it could, well, then you would have 3 discount to your A-bomb. And now this is only giving you 2 discount if it hits 2 separate cards. I feel like that's super safe change, man. Like the Thing is just a little bit too much value, especially when you cycle it out of your Lockjaw. Now, I thought about changing Lockjaw, but I refrained from doing so. I think these changes could be led with first, and then we see if the deck is still doing crazy, because this is a conquest deck, I think. I haven't seen it too much on ladder, even though I think it's still strong there. It's just performing way too good in conquest, which honestly raises the question of should we be balancing for ladder or conquest or both? And I actually don't know where we fall on that spectrum, but regardless, I still, one or the other, I still feel like these cards need these changes. All right, and the final evolved card that I want to change, so the whole high evo package, right? We got WASP. Okay, it's the same thing I just did to the Thing. Instead of hitting 2 random cards, you're gonna hit 1 random enemy card, which, come on, let's face it, is not that bad. Yeah, you get your max value out of WASP if you hit 2 cards, but a lot of the time your opponent only has 1 card on the other end because you're cycling on Lockjaw and they haven't had the time to play a whole bunch of cards. So then zap, you just sting it once and it goes back into the deck and something else comes out. Or it's your final turn and you just want to play it. I think getting a 0/2 is really good value, right? You can even stack it with the on reveal synergies if you do get to play it multiple times because you locked on and drew it again. And then Jane Foster's cheating this out. There's just like way too much going for evolved WASP that I think her just going to zapping or stinging 1 negative power is a totally fine change. So let's quickly review everything that I put together here. So we changed high evo to a 4/7. That's plus 3 power. I took 1 power away from WASP essentially, right? Okay, so now we're at plus 2. It's still kind of a buff. I took 1 away from the Thing. Okay, now we're at plus 1. It's still kind of a buff, but not really because we hurt some negative power synergies, right? So I'd say we're in pretty neutral ground at this point in time, but then I took the power away from Hulk, and in the total, I think we have a sufficient nerf to high evolutionary that still makes it a very good card, still would be run in those Lockjaw cycle decks and would still crush conquest. So I think these are all pretty safe changes, but hey, you got to let me know in the comments below. All right, and then my last nerf here is going to be to Spider-Ham, and this isn't even really a nerf to the card, essentially. It's more a fundamental change. I think a lot of people were shocked that Spider-Ham actually reveals the card that he smacks with the hammer, and I was too, even though we kind of had hints of it beforehand. Yeah, it just seems a little bit too strong. Like if Iceman can't show you what card, why can Spider-Ham, right? And I don't know. I don't think that 1 power difference is the reason. I think you should just change it so that he no longer reveals the transformed card. But you could add that it still shows the stat line that you hit. So you kind of have to play a guessing game. Rather than it showing like, oh, it's Magneto, and then bam, it becomes a pig. Just show me that the hammer hits a pig, right? And then the pig has a 6/12 stat line, and I could go, huh, that's probably Magneto, or it could be Hulk or something like that, right? So you kind of like guess based on what you hit. I know it's close to the same thing. I didn't really want to change this card too much. I just feel like that little bit of information is giving him the nudge to be worthwhile in every single deck, and it's a little bit crazy. Also good with Lockjaw cycles. So yeah, I just feel like that small change would make a huge difference. All right, let's talk about some buffs. Okay, Strong Guy. So you never see Strong Guy anymore. He's at the bottom of the win rates for cards. So I thought, hey, he could use a buff. But you know what? A fun little fact here. Okay, a little bit of history lesson for you guys. So back in beta, Strong Guy was one of the strongest cards in the game because he was a 2/3. and he had the same ability, okay? But now a lot has changed since then. We've had like Series 4 and 5 cards introduced. There's a lot of more synergy things going on. There's MODOK that's out, but I thought it'd be cool if he could go back to a 2-2 and you see if it's broken. If it's too broken, then we just change him. We've seen this time and time again with Team Second Dinner. They'll make a change to a card and then pull back a little bit on it. You know, if they buffed it a little too far, okay, we'll pull it back. If we nerfed it a little bit too hard, we'll pull it back. I think that's a really fun way to approach balance changes because you get to see how the card changes and then you make little tweaks to it from there. I think Strong Guy should go back to a 2-2. It makes him a lot more fun to play early and set up a deck where you're trying to discard maybe your entire hand before that final bell, or you're trying to swarm out the board and then play Nova and Killmonger it and get a bunch of buffs. Like, I think it'd just be really fun to have Strong Guy be viable again. Sarah as well, right? It would be a 1-2 that has the potential to get to 8 power. And honestly, in today's Marvel Snap, a 2-8 isn't that crazy. It's really, really good. But when you look at like Kitty Pryde, for instance, she's doing crazy things. Angela's easily getting up to 8 power. Yeah, there's a lot of work that has to be put into that, but there's a lot of work that has to go into this card, right? It's not that easy to have an empty hand unless you're running MODOK. I could very well see a play where you're playing a lot of cards as much as possible, Strong Guy included, and then on turn 5 you play MODOK, and on turn 6 you have America Chavez in your deck, so you draw her and play her. That seems like a really fun way to play the game. I would like to see this change to Strong Guy, but I'm fully aware that this could be too good, and that's why I'm really leaning on the fact that we could pull it back. We could put him to a 2-1, right? We could put him to a 3-2, just see what works, make this card relevant again. Okay, and my last one here today is not one I actually thought was needed, or I didn't really think about this card all that much, but I was on the Snap Judgments podcast. I'll have the link in the description below. And Nerf Herder brought up that Rogue kind of feels underwhelming when you have Enchantress, and Echo, who's an upcoming card that ruins the abilities of ongoing cards played at her location. You know, it doesn't really leave a lot of space for Rogue to shine in the meta. And I had to agree. I was like, yeah, you're right. It's just kind of getting stomped around by other things. And I think the biggest reason is that Rogue is random. If your opponent has Darkhawk at a location that's hidden behind armor, well, you can't Shang-Chi it, and then you have to Enchantress it probably. So why would you run Rogue? You risk the 50-50 of hitting the armor and then it does nothing. It just kind of feels bad. And I think the reason that I'm actually making this change is I think Team Second Dinner feels that way as well, because they buffed Rogue recently. She was the 3-1, now she's the 3-2. So they're kind of looking for a way to keep her relevant. So my proposed change is not from a random enemy card at the location, but from the last enemy card played at this location, right? So if your opponent played armor on turn 2, but then they played Darkhawk on turn 4, Rogue is guaranteed to snipe that Darkhawk. And that'd be fun. Like, it'd be such a good tech card against ongoing cards. Maybe honestly too good, and we'd have to bring her down to a 3-1 or make her a 4-2. But then I don't want to step on the toes of Enchantress, but already these 3 ongoing tech cards are kind of doing that. They're overlapping each other a little bit. But I thought the agency of when to play the card to steal a specific ongoing ability seems really fun to me. I could see some crazy turn 6 swings where your opponent like has been holding out on that ongoing null, let's say, and they've been destroying a whole bunch of things. Then they play it and you make the read and you play Rogue there to steal the ability. But you know what's interesting about that line, as strong as that seems? You could still do that. You could still do that with Rogue, yet she doesn't get played. Like, imagine how crazy that would be. That'd be such a huge swing. But because of the RNG of the card, I think she gets teched out for other options that are a little bit more consistent, a little bit more reliable. So anyways, we thought this would be an interesting change. I could see it being a little bit too broken, a little bit too good, but hey, come on. We got to bring some of these cards back up in the meta, right? Bring them back to relevancy, and she has so many good variants. She is actually a good card. We could leave her as she is, but it would be nice to slowly take out random effects from the game. Am I right? Anyways, that is it for me for my proposed balance changes. Again, I'm not a developer. I'm just having fun here talking about changes to the game. We're going to find out next week what Team Second Dinner decides to nerf and what they decide to buff. I cannot wait. Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and I'll catch you guys next time.